In the past half hour, leaders at the COP30 climate summit in Brazil have agreed on a deal that ends the summit but fails to mention fossil fuels. Talks had been deadlocked over the issue and carried on hours after the summit was due to end. Oil-rich countries led by Saudi Arabia had lobbied for weaker wording on phasing out non-renewable energy sources. The EU said it would accept the deal but called it far from ideal. Well, with us is our climate and science reporter, Esme Stallard. Spell out what's in this deal, first of all, Esme.
Well, what Brazil were trying to achieve is move beyond just more and more targets. What they wanted to say is there a roadmap to trying to reduce fossil fuels, a roadmap for cutting deforestation? They were supported by 80 countries, including the EU, but they didn't get it in this deal. All this does is reaffirms those previous commitments. There are other countries like China which are happier with the way the deal's turned out. Li Gao, who's a Chinese negotiator, said we've achieved success in a very difficult situation. They'll be happy because there's more financing from developed countries and also measures to try and restrict trade that the EU and China were discussing, particularly over high carbon-intensive industries like steel.
What difference will it make, though? Because there have already been warnings that we're too late to prevent the 1.5 degree Celsius increase that had been part of the Paris Agreement ambitions.
Exactly. Scientists came into this saying we need more aggressive emissions reductions, a very clear idea of how we're going to cut fossil fuels to make sure global temperatures don't continue to rise in line with what they're doing. Looking at what we have here, that is just not going to achieve that. Countries like the UK, Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, is out there, said he was still happy that countries had come together to discuss this issue. But certainly it seems right now that we're not going to see global temperature rise come down with what's on the table. What's
the reaction been then from those smaller nations that have been calling for finance to help them tackle and mitigate the effects? For some, it will be terminal if something isn't done quickly, because the sea levels will rise.
Absolutely. So there's been mixed reaction from them. What they were looking for is a firmer commitment on financing to help them adapt to climate change. That is in this text, so a tripling of that financing. There's also very clear indicators of how they will achieve that, although they're not all happy with what's included. I've just come out of listening to some of the countries. They're still talking now. Panama said it was very disappointed. So I think certainly mixed reactions and didn't go as far as they would like.
Even with a finance deal as part of this agreement, how do you compel the richer nations to actually hand the money over?
Exactly. What we've seen from previous commitments is they just haven't met their target. There was actually an interesting case brought before the International Court of Justice just earlier this year, which basically said there was a legal obligation for developed countries to do that. So those nations could now take those other countries to court, but in practice, will that happen? I think what we're more likely to see is them trying to do bilateral trade agreements to get some at least loans, or maybe even money from developing big nations like China.
That brings me to the obvious next question, which is outside the COP system, how much scope is there for countries to take action, be it unilaterally or with smaller groups of countries in on the act?
I think that's a really good point. I think there are questions whether having a COP process where you're trying to get 200 countries to agree is the right one. China's certainly taking a different approach. They've established many bilateral agreements, particularly within Africa, to expand renewable energy. I think from their negotiators, they feel like they can still take very clear action beyond the COP process. I think what COP for a long time did was set a very clear precedent to business and industry, but they're already moving in some cases further than government. So there are questions even within the UN about what purpose the COP process still stands or does annually.
Esme, for the moment, thank you very much. Esme Stallard.